There's no single universal definition of perfection. Although we can go to a dictionary and we can find a very succinct explanation on what perfection is, this isn't one which is going to help us to satisfy what it means to experience perfection within our day-to-day experience. Is perfection something which we can actually attain? Is it actually achievable? And the truth is that it's relative. In some ways, perfection is attainable. It's something that we can experience. But in other ways, it's not. And we can understand this by understanding the term perfection to be a word which we apply to a situation when we find things to be fulfilling, to be to a standard or a level of satisfaction where we have no complaint. And so in this regard, we might find a meal to be a perfect meal, or the company we're keeping, we might describe it as perfect company. But even when we make that qualification of our experience, we do so with an understanding that there's nothing missing and that there's nothing lacking. But in truth, this isn't how we usually go about our experience. Usually it's a case of us finding something that's lacking. It's usually a case of us identifying the one thing that would make the situation better. So even if it is a perfect meal, we might say, oh, well, this is amazing, but wouldn't it be fantastic if so-and-so was here? Or this is an absolutely perfect situation. Wouldn't it be great if we could have this every day? Or this is an amazing experience. It's a shame that it has to end. So there's always some kind of polarity which is drawing us to the very concept that perfection only exists because of imperfection. And so bound up in our being able to appreciate a moment or an experience as being perfect is the idea that imbued within that experience is lack. And so it is attainable to that degree. However, we can also appreciate from that explanation that it's not wholly attainable, that perfection comes side by side with imperfection. But what we generally tend to do is hold this notion of perfection in a more universal manner, in a manner which is kind of absolute. And the idea of absolute perfection, one where everything is going to be at a level of complete satisfaction, that can't exist and will never exist because it's not the nature of manifested creation. But right now, we're living in an era when perfection is given a great deal of emphasis. And we can see this in terms of how we're being encouraged to experience greater success, to experience greater happiness, to enjoy greater peace and harmony, to be able to manage our time better so that we can get all the things that we want to get done, that we're able to control and regulate our living environment so things are neat and tidy and kept in a way which is immaculate. And so there's this push towards our being able to raise every aspect of our life to a level which comes across as our being able to then experience absolute perfection. But this actually defies the very nature of life, because the very nature of life is for polarity, that there's no capacity for us to be able to ensure that things don't go differently than how we expect. There's no capacity for us to be able to regulate and monitor and control and manage things to the extent that we're not being surprised, that we're not being confronted with challenge. And so even though we may acquire a great deal of information and we may acquire new skill sets and new knowledge, this is a means for us to be able to go about navigating those challenges, to go about navigating the ups and downs, the ins and outs of life. But they're not a way for us to be able to control life or even indeed stop life, because the very nature of life is dual. It's within the duality of manifested creation that there's a polarity, and that polarity creates a tension, and from that tension arises the continuous sequence of events which allows for life. And so we need to understand that everything which is being offered to us in this modern era is a tool not to control life so that everything sustains this high standard, but so that we're able to navigate the manner in which life unfolds. And so on a personal level, we're challenged because we as human beings have a tendency to identify where there's imperfection, to focus in on where there's lack or deficiency. And so this leaves us vulnerable. Vulnerable because we're inclined to interpret any different approach or methodology or piece of information which is being promoted as being useful and beneficial to us as being something which is going to help us to achieve that perfection, to plug that lack, to get rid of that deficiency. But getting rid of deficiency, getting rid of lack, achieving absolute perfection is beyond our capacity. It's impossible. And so we're setting ourselves up for failure. And as a consequence, we're setting ourselves up for greater suffering. What we can do to help us to avoid becoming trapped in this endless pursuit of absolute perfection is to exercise our ability to appreciate and to accept the imperfect with the perfect, to acknowledge that this is how life functions, and that what we are best situated to do is to become skilled at navigating the rise and fall, the interplay between perfection and imperfection. What would be of greatest benefit to us is to develop an attitude of perfection. The perfect attitude is one which would allow us to accept imperfection.